Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. So my name is Wei Ting. I'm the founder of Arc. Today, we are very excited to bring three amazing founders to talk about the challenges and opportunities of scaling companies smartly as we enter 2024, particularly in this AI era. So these founders have created some of the most respected startups in the space using AI natively. We have Dover, one of the most popular startups in the recruiting space today using AI. We have Gamma with a huge and vibrant community of millions of users in the AI presentation space. And we have Metaview, who's built an AI product that recruiters and founders around us kept telling us about. So our main focus today is to explore how to build strong teams and grow your user base with real stories and insights from our guest here today. So without further ado, let's introduce our panelists today. So can each one of you please introduce yourself briefly and maybe share a little known fun fact about yourself that you might be surprising to our audience. Max, would you want to start?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Wei Ting, for having us. Excited to chat with everybody. So I'm Max. I'm the CEO and founder of Dover. So Dover's sometimes kind of hard to describe, but Dover's basically an all-in-one recruiting suite, which is built on top of our flagship product, which is a free ATS, free applicant tracking system for startups. So we, try to solve a lot of problems in the recruiting space. There's some software solutions and some services solutions that we have, but it's all anchored on top of a free ATS, which is sort of your bedrock of your recruiting process. And we think every company should be able to run an incredible recruiting process. So we decided to give the ATS portion away for free. On top of that, we have sourcing, scheduling, and then full cycle recruiting flows that are a lot of which are AI powered. So that's Dover. And I guess a fun fact that about me that's kind of interesting, since this is a panel about AI, I figured I'd focus it on AI. Dover, we started in 2019, we started the company. And then in 2020, we were actually one of the first few apps that got production access to GPT-3. So when it came out back in 2020, which was a very different time, ChatGPT obviously was still 2 years away. It wasn't a viral thing. And I had to do, I think, like 2 or 3 phone calls as like basically interviews with OpenAI to get approval to deploy our app with GPT-3. So just shows you how far progress in the space has come in just the last 2 years or 3 years.
Yeah, you can probably call yourself an OG AI startup now, but that's all right. Thanks, Max. Grant, you're muted actually. Sorry.
Grant's muted.
Grant is muted. So we cannot hear you, Grant.
Shall I jump in just while Grant tries to sort that out?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Hey folks, I'm Siadhal, co-founder at Metaview. Thanks, Wei Ting, for having me on, and pumped to chat with Max and Grant. Metaview is, I guess, taking a very different approach to Dover in that we really focus on one very particular problem that we find a lot of folks have when they're recruiting, which is interviews are incredibly important, i.e. your interactions with candidates, but very hard to do well because often you're focused on taking notes. So we have an AI assistant that is built specifically for the recruiting process to just aid you as the human being in the loop to focus more on running a more human more process. That could mean you're more curious, could mean you're more rigorous, could mean you're more thoughtful. It means lots of different things to different people, but essentially means we take away a lot of the admin associated with hiring that isn't really what makes your team better, or isn't really what makes your beer taste better. Fun fact, I wasn't going to go with this, but with Max having said something sort of that I could jump on as well, I thought it would be fun to share our first like in-app application of GPT-3. Similar situation that we had to what Max described, where there was a sort of early beta access, and we were using it in production for like a very, very small use case, whereas now it's like quite foundational, frankly, to how people think about our product. We were using it the way that Metaview works is we have various ways of making sure that our bot joins your calls and then records them so it can provide the synthesis for you. It's really important for our bot to know who on this call is the interviewer and who is the candidate, because it affects the whole synthesis. Because of course, we only want to summarize really what the candidate's saying. And so we would use GPT-3 just based on the content of the calendar description to reason for us who in this conversation is the person who's the candidate and who is the person who is the interviewer. Because before that point, we were asking, people were having to configure that themselves, like say, well, I'm the interviewer, this is the candidate, and therefore, do your stuff. But we found that this very sort of like very small but actually quite impactful problem was something that even the earlier versions of GPT was pretty good at, like synthesize or understanding the calendar event and making that derivation. So yeah, very small way initially, but now it's really sort of powers a lot of what we do. So yeah, I thought that was a cool example.
No, it's very cool. Thank you, Siadhal. Okay, let's try our luck again with Grant.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Sorry about that. So thanks again for having us here. My name is Grant Lee. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Gamma. We are trying to build a modern alternative to PowerPoint. So reimagining how you might create content, trying to really eliminate the need for formatting a lot of the design work so that you can focus on the content, leveraging AI to really simplify the entire creation flow. Sort of a fun fact about myself, I'm from the Bay Area in California, spent most of my life here, but when we actually started Gamma, I was living in London at the time. We were there for my wife's work, and after the last startup I was at was acquired, I decided to start Gamma with two of my co-founders. This was during definitely peak pandemic back in 2020. So when we were looking to raise money, ended up doing all of our initial pitches virtually. So there's actually many of our angel investors I've never actually met in person yet, because it was all during a pretty crazy time.
Thanks for intro, Grant. And finally, my name is Wei Ting. I'm the founder of Arc. We are a global talent marketplace connecting great remote engineers with companies worldwide. So to kick off our discussion, let's first talk about how to build a great team in this era. So Max, Dover is one of the most beloved startups in the recruiting space, and you've helped hundreds of companies recruit great talent. So if you were to build a company again today, what are the critical components you think must be in place in order to build your muscle and processes for recruiting?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we work with like a lot of startups, primarily, couple like seed stage, Series A, and then all the way through sometimes Series B and Series C. That's, I would say, the companies that like use Dover obsessively and like really like us. And I think the reason that is the case is because we take away a lot of the sort of very critical but not strategic work in recruiting. So this is kind of a maybe Dover philosophy thing, but and this applies outside of recruiting as well. There's a lot of work to building a company you have to do. That's very critical, but it's not strategic, right? So like, I don't know, filing state taxes is maybe like a very boring example of this. It's just something that has to get done, but it's not really the thing that's going to make or break your company. And I think actually the insight to building your company is like really, and building a good muscle for recruiting is taking away and kind of outsourcing as much of that critical work, because that's the thing that's completely undifferentiated between companies. I think a lot of founders want to innovate on every part of recruiting, which is actually often a mistake. I think what you want to do is get like 80 or 90% of it right by looking at what other companies are doing, what other startups are doing, and just what best practices are. And then really focus on the strategic stuff. And I think the strategic stuff, to like Sal's point, is actually like the interviews, like pitching and closing candidates, figuring out your job market, your job market fit. Especially if you're an early stage company, you're making your first, marketing hire, first engineering hire, first sales hire. Those are usually the toughest because you're actually learning a ton as well. And learning is faster if you have like a really tight feedback loop, and you're not spending a lot of your time on like sourcing and scheduling and, taking interview notes, right? Like all these things that are sort of, you kind of have to do. But if you can reduce your cognitive overload on those things, it actually frees up a lot of brain space for you to actually have conversations, like meaningful conversations with a lot of candidates, spend a lot of time talking to your team to figure out what you're actually looking for. And we kind of call that whole process like job market fit, which is, once you hire 10, engineers or salespeople, you kind of have it down. That part becomes a lot easier, and then it's, smooth sailing. But when you're hiring your first, second, third person for a particular role, there's just a lot of work that you have to do. And that's where we often find startups get really overwhelmed and overworked. Obviously, a lot of these companies have founders doing the recruiting, right? Up until you're 20, 30, 40 people. So, and founders have a ton of other stuff on their plate. So That's kind of Dover's philosophy. But even outside of Dover, I think I would just advise automate or delegate as much of that like critical but non-strategic work. So like sourcing, scheduling, app review, like all of those things, and then really focus on the job market fit, which is a lot of conversations with candidates, like pitching and closing and selling.
Right. So I'm just curious on a quick follow-up question. So with now Dover in the market, would you envision, say, if I'm a founder starting a new company right now, so would you say that I will be able to use something like a Dover and I'll actually delay to hire my first recruiting hire within our team? Is that the right way for me to think about this if I were to start a brand new company?
I would say Dover is like a more flexible solution. So when you're bigger, you have sort of more forecastable recruiting needs. You're hiring a lot consistently, and I think that's when like hiring in-house makes a ton of sense. But early on, you'll often see companies that are hiring really aggressively for 3 months and then they just don't hire for 6 months. And so a flexible solution would make more sense. So that is where Dover fits in for sure.
Got it. All right. Thank you. And I guess AI, speaking of AI is already eliminating a lot of manual work teams used to do in a lot of areas, especially in recruiting, right? As Max you said, simplifying candidate sourcing, streamlining interviews, and so forth. So this is questions for Siadhal. So since Metaview has been consistently mentioned by friends, founders, and recruiters around us as one of their most loved AI tools out there, can you share some of the biggest benefits you're seeing from your own team or other companies that are adopting AI, and any key challenges?
Yeah, I think by far, definitely from our experience, and we grow our company bottoms up. So we target end users who sort of have like day-to-day problems that we think we can help them solve. And so definitely with that sort of target audience in mind, the biggest benefit that we lean into and we get excited actually about building towards is essentially just, you can think one of the sort of the real obvious things that's changed with AI is that the bucket of things that can be automatable has just gotten much larger. So it used to be the fact you could just automate the things that were like entirely predictable and you could program something to automate. Now that's changed. You can sort of like, you have these bucket of tasks that are not totally predictable to like the letter or to the particular output, but are predictable how you'd go about achieving that output, which are now automatable. So in our case, that's writing up your scorecards or writing your interview notes or providing notes to a hiring manager, or whoever it might be. So basically, long way of saying, by far the biggest benefit that we're seeing that people are adopting is using AI to pick up the low leverage work. So I think this might be a bit of a repeat theme between Max, Grant, and I, just because I think it's the most visceral way that AI is impacting businesses, and people operating with the businesses, is like getting rid of some of my work that I didn't used to like to do so I can do more high leverage stuff. But that's essentially where we're seeing it. We obviously see that within recruiting, which is, I guess, part of the question here, but we also see it within our team, right? We're predominantly a technical team. GitHub Copilot and using ChatGPT to sort of pair on certain coding challenges or SQL queries we want to put together has become like de rigueur for us. Like it's something people are doing all the time. So yeah, really sort of those sort of quite tactical use cases, frankly, things that you use day to day to help with your day being more efficient, is where we're seeing the most benefit. I think over time, so essentially that comes down to speed, right? Do things faster and also have more time to spend on other things. I do think there's a connection to quality as well, and I think over time we may see more focus on, hey, how can we use these reasoning capabilities to actually specifically and explicitly help us with the quality of our decisions. But I think right now the way that we're impacting quality is more through freeing up space in the brain to think about the things that really require our human touch, rather than actually using the AI to sort of like detect things that we would otherwise miss. But I do think that's a really interesting, I think that will start to come out, that will become more and more of a thing over the next months and years.
Yeah. Grant, is the team at Gamma also using AI tools to eliminate some of the lower leverage work internally?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're constantly exploring and leveraging new tools. I think one of the things is when you're early, if you're still a startup and you're kind of living through this now where there's so many different applications with being able to leverage AI, you think a lot differently about maybe the team you might want to build over time. And I think you end up being a little bit more patient in the sense that there are tools that can maybe help your core team today just do more than they could have otherwise. So for instance, on like the customer support side, in the past you might be in a rush to kind of instantly try to ramp up that team if you're seeing a lot of inbound requests. But today there's so much in there to help you just even understanding the sort of requests that are coming through, and AI can sift through a lot of that, can help automate some of the responses that you can really then say, what is the core need we need today? What is the profile of hire we need? And I think we've seen that sort of across many different functions now, and I think really help kind of shape how we probably want to build a team for years to come.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. So speaking of hiring, so we're now obviously in a remote first world, and we can hire anyone anywhere in the world. Max, I'm just curious, can you share maybe a unique or unconventional strategy, maybe with the use of AI or maybe beyond the use of AI that you have seen that has helped companies recruit and retain amazing talent?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, that's something we think about a lot for teams and a lot of folks that are using Dover. This is like their top priority is how do we build a great team. Recruiting is part of it. Retention is another big part of it. Maybe the part that I'll focus on is the giving leverage to your team part. So it's one really cool thing is that it's a lot easier than ever to spin up services and SaaS for things that you would have maybe 2 years, 5 years, 10 years ago needed to hire for. And so we all know this, right? There's like a bunch of companies like, I don't know, Pilot is an example, right? Since I talked about like a finance use case before, where if you're spinning up a company, before you might need to do a ton of setup work yourself, maybe even hire somebody to do finance for you even early on. And now you don't need to, right? You can kind of put that section of the business relatively on autopilot. And once you scale, you can actually put somebody strategic sort of overseeing that operation, but that person is just a lot more leveraged than they were historically. And so I do think there's, we've seen a lot of really effective small teams emerge more and more recently. And I think the average, like there's a lot of companies that are exiting with like 10 people, 20 people, really large valuations and stuff like that. So I do think it's really possible now to build a team that's really small and really effective. And I think the reason, kind of coming back to your question about why that helps you recruit and retain great talent, I think talent density is super, super important for people. And that way if you employ the strategy, you're able to get really strong people who want to have a lot of responsibility. Like the best people usually want a lot of responsibility, a lot of ownership, a lot of purview across the business to have real business impact. Just generally, as you get more senior and as you get stronger and stronger folks on your team, that's just what they want. And you can have a much higher density of those people if you give them some resources to leverage to achieve those goals. Obviously, you can hire internally as well, but then your team scales. You get into larger companies come with their own host of problems, but it's really cool when you're 10, 20, 50 people. I mean, obviously, some companies do this into the hundreds of people where you're really able to have really high talent density. So that's kind of what I would encourage is, there's a lot of things that make starting a startup easy nowadays that you can employ. You don't have to reinvent the wheel from scratch. You should really focus, just like I was talking earlier about finding job market fit and really focusing on that. Finding product market fit is like the most important thing a startup can do and not worry about, all this sort of like critical but not strategic work. And I think that helps you get better talent too, because they can really focus on the stuff that's high impact for the business and have wide swaths of ownership at the same time.
Yeah. Siadhal, Grant, anything?
Yeah, I think I don't think there's a ton of I don't think I have anything like really unconventional. Sure, I think there's a lot of like really hard things around scaling and retaining a great team that you just sometimes need to be reminded of. And I think I think talent density is literally the key, especially for a startup where essentially people know they're joining and there's this chance of massive upside. But a lot of the time, what they also, whether they consciously know it or not, I believe, they want to know that the people I'm going to meet here are going to be really useful for people to know in my career. And that basically means they have to be high-performing people, because then you're almost like spreading the risk. Hey, if this doesn't go well, some of us will go on to do great things and bring others with us. And that's like this sort of tribe you're trying to create. So I think there's like massive upside associated with getting the first 10, 20, however many, like name your N, really right. And there's obviously a lot of pain you might have to go through, and maybe even pressure you'd have to withstand, like in order to maintain that, i.e. like, hey, we really need this person in this seat, but we haven't found someone good, and we're getting pressure maybe from the board or whatever it might be to, why haven't we hired this person? Are you not a talent magnet? All these sort of like things that, you will be considerations. But yeah, we're big believers that really pays dividends. And when I think about, we're not a huge team here at Metaview, but we have really, I think, a really high bar and also really excellent retention. And I think a big part of that, there's lots of good things about the company, but I think one of the best is this idea that it would really suck to go somewhere else and then be surrounded by people who aren't as good, right? That would, even if it was a step up in some other measured way, like comp or something like this, it's a step down really, and you'd feel it. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah, one thing I'll add just from our perspective, and I don't know if it's necessarily contrarian here or unconventional, but it's for us when we were just getting started. Again, this is sort of peak pandemic. I think one of the things to be mindful of is just try to be authentic and sort of honest with yourself in terms of the type of initial company you're trying to build here. For us, we had this moment of time where we thought, maybe we actually will just build a fully distributed team, because again, during the pandemic, I was actually still in London. But as we started hiring our first set of team members, we actually all came from another company called Optimizely, which was going through an acquisition at the time. And basically just sat down with each of the team members and asked, what sort of environment would give you energy? And do you have any plans of moving, out of San Francisco? What are your long-term aspirations? And every single team member said they had no plans of leaving San Francisco, and they actually wanted to work in person. So despite not being able to work in person at the time, we're still doing shelter in place in San Francisco. We ended up signing a sublease from a small another company that was moving out. Eventually moved our entire team into that San Francisco office, and it's worked out for us because it really, I think, the team members all benefited and really wanted that environment. It's not to say that that's every startup's aspirations, but having that conversation early and often, I think, allows you to figure out what is the right environment for your team, and hopefully everybody that then is on board is happy with that setup.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing all of these. So let's switch gear a little bit and let's talk about AI in growth. So Grant, Gamma is reinventing how presentation is done, powered by AI. And you guys are such an inspiration. I mean, having grown to millions of users, it's almost like a cult-like following. So can you maybe share an example of how AI has redefined how companies are acquiring and retaining users?
Yeah, but I think even pre-AI, the sort of goal of every software company is really to shorten the time to value. So you want your users to be able to, understand what you offer immediately if possible. And if you can make that incredibly easy for them to see the value, then they're obviously more likely to stick around. And I think perhaps even better, they'll go on and tell all their friends about how, amazing that experience is. I really believe in sort of Sam Altman's quote around this, which is, to paraphrase, basically, if you can build something that people spontaneously tell all their friends about, you've already done something incredibly hard that most startups aren't able to achieve. So with AI, I think what we've seen is a lot of these tools and applications be able to leverage in a way that can immediately see some sort of value, even if it's not the full-fledged product. And sort of, for us, basically, pre even kind of this AI movement, we've been trying to do a lot in terms of just reimagining the building blocks going into presentations. But anytime you have a new application, new building blocks, nobody wants to learn how to, use these building blocks, even if they think they could be better, because we're all frankly, short on time. And if you can leverage AI in a way, for us, we kind of infused it into the creation flow such that instead of giving people kind of a scattered set of building blocks, you get them a set of pre-assembled building blocks. So now they can start playing with the tool. They can understand why your building blocks might be better in the sort of workflow for them. And it may not be for everybody, but for the people that are able to play with that pre-assembled set of building blocks, they can go on to say, okay, now I can use this for my next project or my next presentation. And I think that's where the magic of AI really comes in. Within that first setting, you can deliver that value. I think the cohort of companies before this, a lot of them leverage different hacks to this, which is maybe creating templates or like pre-configured recipes or playbooks. And I think that works to a certain extent. AI can make that experience even more personalized. So rather than trying to pull a generic template off the shelf, you can say, hey, actually, I'm trying to create something in this realm. Can you give me a better starting point? I think that's what's really helped us kind of get kind of our early momentum around user adoption and usage.
Yeah, I'm curious on how about on the B2B side, Max and Siadhal, have you guys seen anything acquiring customers? partners within companies?
Nothing. Our sort of playbook for acquiring customers is not sort of reliant actually on a lot of this. It may well be sort of under the hood of some of the standard tools that we use, like you're powering certain things, and like we don't necessarily know how. But in terms of like it being an explicit way that we've gone about acquiring users, not so much. We do have I guess we don't really acquire a user until after they've used our product. So almost inherently, our product in itself is like it does its own marketing. We get people into it, they use it for free, and then go from there. But nothing more sort of exotic or clever than that, really.
Yeah, I was going to say something really quickly, exactly similar, which is that we're all product companies here, and ultimately people use the product, or they're going to love the product because other people referred the product, and I think the more of that you can expose to customers early on, the more that you can show what your product does and how it works, right? In Metaview's case, I've experienced that; like it's really cool, right? So you can in an indirect way, you're not doing like AI sales automation necessarily, but you're actually making your product better, and maybe you're offering some stuff that you wouldn't have offered before with AI that people can use for free because it's so cheap to do a lot of that sort of thing now, which just drives that sort of product-led growth loop. So I think that's the way we use it.
Yeah, speaking of AI sales automation, I've been personally starting to receive quite a few like cold emails from AI SDRs. I think it's it remain to be seen like how well this whole AI sales is going to really work out. Yeah, I'm sure all of us emails box will become even more spammed in the coming month. Yeah. So speaking of that, so many companies try some sort of growth hack or guerrilla marketing. So Siadhal, have you done anything or seen any creative or noteworthy?
Yeah, I think we've done a few things that are on that front that have worked out. Can you folks still hear me? Because waiting has paused for me. Okay, cool.
Yes.
Yeah. We've done a few things that I think have worked out pretty well there. In fact, I would say our like more unconventional growth tactics are more effective than when we've tried the conventional, like ads and SEO and this sort of thing. I think there are two things that have worked really well for us. One is taking a very proactive stance on getting involved in the conversation that's happening. And there's a bunch of ways you can do that. Partnerships is one, sort of buddying up with other tools who are maybe selling to a similar customer set and running an event together. That usually goes pretty well for us. But we probably had even more impact with almost like micro influencers. So these are like, folks who we work with who might have, in the thousands of even LinkedIn or Twitter followers, nothing huge, but we run really sort of high frequency plays with these folks. Big fan of that, and like very much looking forward to working out how to scale that up. And maybe even we contribute to making one of these people even more of an influencer, right? Because of the work we do together, and that's sort of mutually beneficial. So there's like a partnership aspect to that too. But then I'd say the one that's we get the most joy out of when it's gone well is enabling our customers within our marketing. So I think there's like a thing that's at play here where everyone is quite aware that personal brand is getting more and more important. So everyone wants to be a mini influencer of some proportion. Obviously, different people have different feelings on how important that is to them, but everyone wants they want to be exhibiting some sort of personal brand. And so I think this propensity of customers to be willing to get involved in marketing is actually much higher than I expected. And so when we've asked customers, for example, recently we did a sort of like mock public service announcement where we asked our customers to film themselves explaining a negative consequence of Metaview for them. And like in our case, it's because, hey, you don't need to use your keyboard anymore. So it's like, you don't need your hands during your interview. So people were saying, I'm stroking my dog too much, or I've learned to do the yo-yo, or now my fingers, like these sort of like silly things. And like, literally, I think I emailed about 7 or 8 customers, and like 6 of them said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll film it. It's like quite amazing, really. I seriously think like 10 years ago, that would not have been the case. You would have people saying, what are you talking about? Of course, I'm not going to do that. And they were sort of like in our little ad. And the great thing about that, of course, is they're more likely to share it. And, one of the reasons we were doing it, not only is it to create community, but it's also because finding those sort of, like broadcast referral moments are quite difficult. And of course, up to that point, maybe sometimes just asking people, hey, if you're really enjoying it, why don't you post about it or something? Really lame. But actually, if you're bringing them into the creative in some way, obviously it's playing up to what they want to be, which is seen as thoughtful and forward thinking. And at the same time, they're more likely to share it with their network. And so I think that works really well. I think there's definitely a requisite, which is you need to have a product they really like and they want to like be publicly associated with. We did actually have a few years where that was not the case. Now, like very happy to say that we do have that, and that just actually opens up a bunch more options in terms of that guerrilla marketing.
Yeah, amazing. Grant or Max, have you guys done anything or seen anything interesting in this?
No, nothing too crazy. I mean, I think some of probably just what we've described from our own product experience is really just integrating into the product itself. But I love the idea there. I think we'll probably try to leverage our user base for something similar.
Yeah, obviously in our case, we focus on recruiters. It's very obvious where recruiters hang out. It's LinkedIn, so like there's like a very clear, like there's that plays into it. Whereas I imagine with other products, it's less obvious that type of broadcasting makes sense. So yeah, everything's obviously different.
Yeah. So Sal mentioned that it is critical for us to build a product that people really love. And I'm curious, Max, in terms like aha moments in products or in user growth, is there any aha moments and challenges when it comes to actually using AI as related to growth that you guys have seen in the past?
Yeah, I can probably talk about a lot of both aha moments and challenges that we've had integrating AI in the product. So maybe I'll focus on one briefly. Like, the aha moment for us, one aha moment was, in the industry, there's this distinction between like products and services. We kind of span both. I think a lot of companies are product companies, a lot of companies are service companies. Some have a little bit of both. But the really cool thing about AI is that it actually takes a lot of things that used to be services, as in delivered outcomes, by a human usually, and can kind of move them into product land. A really simple example of this maybe is like, I don't know, scheduling automation, right? We used to have sort of, a lot of people used to have EAs, or you would just have to schedule yourself. Calendly is kind of the product solution to that, right? We're probably the leading product solution. I'm sure there's a lot. But if you want to have a personalized scheduling experience, that was still sort of in the realm of services. Whereas now I would say that's actually completely productized. Like, you can have a very repeatable, consistent, fast, and cheap experience and offer that. So that's kind of an aha moment for us, where like one of the things we think about is how can we move stuff from services, which means it's expensive, it needs a human, there's a lot of fallibility, into AI land, which makes it feel more like a product and it's more integrated into the product. A challenge that's related to that is that I'm sure everybody building with AI who's like on the panel or listening to this has experienced. It's often really easy to get to like 95% or even 99% correctness and accuracy and things like that. And sometimes getting that last like 5% or 1% is actually quite tough. And so it really depends on the use case. I think there's a lot of people who just like want to blindly apply AI to things. And for some things, it works really well if you don't need like 100% accuracy. Getting that 100 is quite tough for a lot of things. So at least in our experience. So I think one challenge that we've had is like, we tried to do a lot of automation with GPT-3. We were only able to bite off so much because we had a really high bar for like, okay, this is good enough for us. GPT 3.5 came out, the foundational models got better. And then 4 came out, and a lot of those problems actually ended up being solved. So part of it is like, this is kind of a challenge, but like a lot of, when you need that really good performance or that 100% accuracy, or whatever your benchmark for like perfect or like good enough to put in front of a customer is, sometimes it's really hard to hit without improvements in the models, which do happen over time. And so sometimes you just gotta wait. And sometimes there's just some stuff that you can't necessarily do quite yet. So maybe that's obvious, but it is a challenge where sometimes the demo is really cool, and like that you see, like you try it and you're like, oh, this is going to work really well. And then you apply it and you're like, you can't quite get that last mile sometimes. So that's a big challenge.
Yeah. Going to Sal, do you have anything to add?
No. Nothing particularly to add on my side to that, no.
All right. So while AI has tons of potential, if we were to rush things, it can probably lead to more chaos, as perhaps the current solutions might not be production ready. So Grant, I'm curious, as a founder, what are some of your ways of integrating AI into business operations thoughtfully? And how do you ensure that it serves as a real tool to augment your team's efficiencies and effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll answer it because I think part of the question is, a lot of us are integrating AI into our product, and how can you ensure that when you're delivering this to your end users that it's actually providing any value, or is it just for the sake of slapping AI on it? And I think and this may not apply to every product, but if you have a product where you as a team can actually dog food, that's obviously for us like the best starting point. You might have something that's too early for the rest of the market, but you dog food aggressively internally. And for us, oftentimes you're creating or making up instances to be able to use your product. And so we would do these sort of fun events where we, on a weekly basis, kind of create different themes for presentations, and we would leverage our AI to try to create some of this output for our own sake of presenting it to each other. And then you can quickly kind of build some intuition around, okay, what's actually being useful and what's not, and obviously start refining. If you're also able to sort of simultaneously build, an early community of users, you can then kind of take that to the next phase, which is you've dog fooded a little bit internally. You have some intuition of maybe where the product is, falling short. You start exposing some of that to your community, asking them for constructive feedback, candid feedback. And if you can do this super early on, even if it's in the sort of wireframe or prototype phase, you can get some sort of immediate direction as to where is going to be a good use of your time, and where is maybe like even if you were to invest a bunch of time getting AI into integrate into the product, it's not just going to deliver any value. I think there's a great way to sort of test some of those assumptions. After you've sort of kind of vetted some of this with the community, you go back to refining, and then hopefully at some point you're doing some sort of phased rollout, with the rest of your user base, such that you can actually measure, what is the hypothesis you have around this usage of AI? Is it going to drive some sort of activation or usage metric? When you roll it out, do you get any unforeseen sort of feedback or negative implications? And then go from there. So we try to be sort of deliberate in the sort of rollout, knowing that oftentimes, you might assume AI is going to kind of fix some of your problems or solve some of your users' needs, but you don't really know until you get into the hands of users. And if you can do that in a very thoughtful way, you can kind of learn from your users along the way.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Max, Sal, anything you'd like to add here?
Yeah, I can add a super quick thing, which doesn't apply to every AI startup, and probably not most. But one thing that's, if it's not a real-time use case that you have, then one really easy way is to just have a human queue for approval early in your rollout phase that you can actually check responses and results with. Obviously, you want to do your own internal testing, but oftentimes it's useful, to before you're like presenting results to your customers, to just do a human review on it until you get some threshold that you're pretty happy with. Your mileage may vary depending on your exact use case, but we found that this is a really effective way, at least for Dover, when we roll out new features that are not real time, where you're like, doing something immediately and you need a response, is to put a human on it, and then a day later or a week later or whatever, be like, okay, cool, we have a lot of confidence. It also lets you build confidence in your own systems by seeing a lot of real world use cases.
Yeah, I think in terms of in our operations, we definitely don't have, and my guess would be we won't have like policies or whatever around people like making sure they're being effective with how they're leveraging AI and going about their work. I actually think the whole point of this is it's like you'll hire or not hire people based on how effective they are at using the tools that are broadly available and at their disposal. And you expect people to make the decisions about what is actually helping them get to the output. I think we're still talking about, in terms of obviously how our business operates, literally the work that our team does every day. It's totally still human in the loop, right? The person who's accountable for the output is the person, irrespective of what tool set they use. And so I think as long as you have that principle, and as long as you have basically a team that is engaged enough to know that they're still responsible for the output, no matter how they get there, you sort of don't have to worry too much about a process or a framework for adoption of AI. I'm sure that might not be true at much larger organizations, but for us, it would just be like overkill to, I think, have any other policy than that.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot for sharing these. So now, as the final segment of our panel, I'd like to ask all panelists a series of quick questions, almost like a group lightning round of some sort. Are you guys ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. So first, my favorite question, the Peter Thiel contrarian question.
Uh,
Is there a contrarian view or practice that you swear by, or any beliefs that you have that few other people actually do share with you?
Yeah, I can start that one. Sorry, I'll try to be rapid fire as possible, but I'll give a hiring hot take, which is actually AI and hiring related. So I think there's a lot of talk about AI being biased and like concerns about that, especially in the recruiting space. I think my hot take is that AI is less biased typically than humans. I've worked with enough humans in recruiting to know that humans are extremely biased, and even a AI that's not like fully I guess unbiased around the edges is often better. Obviously, there's a lot of considerations here. I'm kind of glossing over it, but I think the really easy example that I always give is when you're doing like a resume review or something, right? A lot of hiring managers will just hone in on one company that they recognize, that they know. If I get a resume from like Gamma or Metaview or Arc or something, and that person's worked there, I'm like, oh, cool, I've heard of those companies. It must be a cool candidate. You kind of light up all of a sudden. But for everyone, these are all great companies, obviously, but there's also 10 equivalent companies that I haven't heard of for each of those, and you might just actually just say, oh, I haven't heard of this, and kind of your eyes glaze over. And AI doesn't do that, right? And that's like one really simple example that I think most people understand, but that happens in every other way in recruiting where it's not like a bias per se, but it's it is a bias. So my hot take is that a contrarian practice is that you should leverage AI in a lot of ways because it's actually a lot less biased than humans in ways that you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I'll actually jive on that because I have a similar. I think it's contrarian. Obviously, it's like maybe not. It's not crazy, but we thought a lot about resume bias in sort of like hiring the early team. And then one of the factors that we also took into account in that was, well, when you're hiring your 10th person, one of the things they're going to do is look through LinkedIn at who are your employees and where did these people used to work. And so there is actually, if to completely stack your team with rough diamonds that you sort of find, using first principles assessment techniques and that actually have never, don't have a sort of impressive resume is a bad thing. I think a lot of people would sort of espouse that as like, don't worry about the resume at all, don't worry about the background. That feels like pretty crazy to me. I think it's a factor. It's not the only factor. I think the thing people are overreacting to is people that over rely on the resume and therefore just hire based on that. But actually, you should be taking it into account to some extent. And another one I'd throw in there is there's a lot of, again, this is quite recruiting specific, but there's a lot of drum beating around structured interviewing, which basically means like ask the same questions to every person that you hire. I think there's some validity to that, but I also think basically it's like almost how you do like okay hiring at complete scale as opposed to amazing hiring, because it's, of course, every human being you're meeting is totally different. And I might, let's say, Wei-Ting, you sort of apply for a job. We have our first conversation. In the perfect world, I would be trusted, or I'd be enabled and empowered to think, okay, Wei-Ting is not good on these attributes. I know that from my first call. I'm not going to bother going deeper on that in my next set of interviews either. What I really want to find out is these set of strengths really strong? So I'm going to change my interview plan to focus on this to really get to know that human being in front of me. So I think that's, funny enough, one of the things we think about that can be a downstream advantage of our product too, where right now, again, people think structured interviewing, ask the same questions all the time. I think that's not a good idea. It's better than probably better than the Wild West, but it's not actually like the end state we should be aiming for.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, the one I'll throw into the mix from somewhat contrarian view is when it comes to hiring, especially early stage startups, for us, the sort of mantra is don't hire until it hurts. I think oftentimes startups, when they feel like things are starting to work, they get into this mode of, we're going to start hiring, we're start growing faster, we're going to build a team. I think for us, what I've observed is that, especially for founders, if you can really kind of resist that temptation, at least early on, and really not hire until it hurts, you get a chance to do a couple things. One is you get to kind of take on the responsibility of that role yourself, try to see what it actually looks like, really kind of empathy for what that role entails. And then you can really, when you do go hire, kind of know what great looks like, because you're probably not great at it yourself, but you've done enough to kind of learn what it takes to at least do the job. And if you start doing that as a founder, I think that sort of mindset really trickles down to your team, because then your team is in a growth mindset of continuously learning, expanding their own roles and maybe worldview of what their jobs might entail. And then I think over time that sort of compounds, because you have a team that is able to learn quickly, potentially even train and onboard other team members quickly, and then longer term, you have this team that is able to kind of embrace any sort of obstacle, or this mindset of like overcoming challenges together in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, thank you. Those are amazing tips. Thank you. So second question, um, what unconventional resource or inspiration, be it a book, philosophy, a person, or even a movie, has made a significant influence on your entrepreneurial journey?
I can start with this one, and maybe this is a little cheesy, but personal is, for me, it's definitely been my parents that have greatly shaped kind of the entrepreneur and founder I'm trying to become, and have tried to evolve over time. And the reason is, when we were growing up, didn't have a whole lot. I think definitely the sort of immigrant mindset of coming to this country, they didn't have a whole lot. Oftentimes working, throughout my childhood, they were working multiple jobs just to support me and my brother. And so the mindset has always been absolutely there is no substitute for hard work. You put in the work over a long period of time, good things can happen. And the funny thing is, like, my parents are actually so different. So although they have that same genuine sort of instinct and philosophy on life, my mom has always pushed me to be super prepared, always be ready, continuously learning, always be hungry to pick up new things, because you don't know when opportunity might come your way. And my dad is like, always be super patient. He's probably the most patient person I know. And there's this really kind of, for him, this resistance to chase shiny objects. And so I think a lot of founders will, whether it's tech or whatnot, will go chase those things. And my dad has always been, be patient, don't go in and rush into things, be thoughtful. And so I've tried to sort of combine those two mindsets into one, which is, those principles kind of coalesced is essentially be patient, but always be ready. And I think as a founder, that allows you to just ensure that, again, you're being thoughtful, deliberate on any of the decisions you're making. And ultimately, when some opportunity does come about, you need to be, ready to move quickly, because, those can also be fleeting moments in time. So hoping that I continue to learn from kind of my parents and what they've sort of instilled in those principles in me.
Thank you, Grant.
I think mine's much less I don't know what the word is, but that was very thoughtful and very sort of kind, that was great. Like, obviously I had a great upbringing too, but my one, when I first saw the question that came to mind was, it's going to sound really lame, but I think it's rap music. I grew up listening to a lot of rap music, obviously a lot of aggression, a lot of like showing off. Not that I think I do that, or obviously it's a bit aggressive when the time is right, I hope. And I think, yeah, that is probably, and if I'm ever feeling like, hey, back's against the wall, I usually have like a rap playlist that I'll go back and listen to and get fired up about. So I think it helps a lot. Especially not Grant, I know you grew up in the Bay Area, I think you mentioned. I grew up I based in the UK, grew up in the UK. Obviously London's a great city, definitely like a financial economic hub. So lots of ambitious people here, don't get me wrong. But the sort of like like entrepreneurialism is not as much of a thing. And I think there's something quite entrepreneurial about a lot of rap music. I think maybe that's one of the reasons why I took this path, which is, it's unconventional in every walk of life, but it's more unconventional here than maybe it is in other parts of the US, for example.
I think
I'll give a super quick one. I'll give a super quick one, which is a little bit different. But the CEO of Snowflake, Frank Slootman, has a book called Amp It Up. Is the name of the book. There it is. There it is. All right. Great minds. It's a great book. I recommend people read it. It's very different than it's very applicable, I would say, over the last like year and a half when tech has been in like hard mode or wartime mode, I think as he puts it, and like what's his name, the Andreessen guy puts it as well, right? It's we were in kind of peacetime mode for the first couple of years, I think, of all of our companies, and then we went into wartime mode to some degree, some more than others, I'm sure. And so I think that book was really, really helpful. I mean, it's obviously a little bit targeted for larger organizations, but it is really good from a management philosophy perspective of how do you approach like, markets with really tough competition or really difficult macros and things like that. So I would recommend that.
Yeah, I agree. I think it definitely made me think more about, being proactive about amping it up. And we have to quote Max on referring to Ben Horowitz as the Andreessen guy. That's gonna that's gonna go down.
I was like, perfect.
Yeah. Ben Horowitz is rapping to his portfolio company.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I was gonna say, you know him because of the rap angle. So there you go.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you, guys. So, third question. So, as a founder, is there a particular mental framework or guiding principle that you return to consistently in decision making, perhaps other than raps? Could you explain how it's applied in a real situation?
I think I'd say the one that comes up most consistently and actually like affects decisions in like a, rather than just like giving you the motivation to do the certain thing, more like actually makes you choose a different thing, is we have a phrase that we use called optimize for rate of learning. So basically I think startups are really vehicles to earn a bunch of secrets. And sometimes, of course, you have to spend a lot of time proving you have that secret by like getting customers and getting them to pay you and that sort of thing. But really, you're just trying to accrue these secrets, that other people in the world don't know. Hey, if you do this thing, they'll like it, blah, blah, blah. So we try and come back to optimize for rate of learning. We had actually a good example quite recently, quite sort of small nuance, but still I think does a good job of explaining or demonstrating the principle, which was one of our big priorities right now is expansions. Essentially, how can we get our existing customers to buy more licenses? And we had a series of experiments that we are running to try and work out how to communicate this, while obviously at the same time we just want to grow our top line ARR as quickly as possible. And so like these are hopefully perfectly aligned, but on the margins actually come into tension. And so we were talking about tactics to do this. And the person who I was working with on it was mentioning, like, we can target these larger companies with this messaging or whatever it might be. And actually, we realized, no, we're trying to optimize for rates of learning here. I don't care what size the company is. If a company that has one license goes to 2 licenses, but we learn the message that made them do that, that's all I care. All we're trying to learn about here is the message, we're not measuring this by ARR. We're measuring this by conversion upon receiving this message, irrespective of how big the sort of the quantum of growth was. And so that changed the actual things we ended up doing, massively reduced the number of people we were including in the communication, actually. So like we could keep a much tighter experiment, i.e. message 20 people initially, see what happens, then another 20, rather than try and expand our whole customer base, with one sort of like perfect message, which is super tempting, obviously, when you're thinking, hey, how, what are various ways that we can like blast past our number this month or this quarter, or whatever it might be. So I think it's served us well overall, but often obviously comes in, there's tension
there. I think for me, a framework that we use, or that I use personally, internally, I think maybe the high level way of putting this is like people on the ground should be the ones making decisions and having ownership. So it kind of relates to what I was talking about earlier about just like really good people, I think, like lots of ownership, lots of ability to impact the business and to move the business forward in really meaningful ways. And so we kind of have this belief that like, leadership should set, or managers in general should set like the high level strategy of like where you're going, and then the team or people on the ground who are actually working on the thing should figure out how we get there exactly, right? And that could be basically just like as much as possible. They could have as much impact as possible and take on as much scope in these projects of how to get there as possible. And it's got this really positive flywheel effect, I think, because you see really good people shine in that environment, and then you obviously, they can have more impact over time. And so it sort of like lets people grow and lets the good people grow. Often it'll scare people who are not excited to take on that sort of ownership or make big company decisions. But we've had a lot of history of like, somebody who's like an IC in one part of the business will make some decisions that like actually affect a broad part of the business, and some of our best features and product developments and even like impacts on our vision have come from that. So that's sort of maybe a little bit of more unconventional framework of how we make decisions of like what we're working on and who's doing what.
That's a good one. I'll bring it back to I guess Andreessen, which is, I think Ben Horowitz had the framework of basically always think about your people, your product, and profits in that order. And when it comes to people, it's obviously your team, but also your customers and your users. And spending the majority of your time really just thinking deeply about the decisions you're making, how it impacts them, and hopefully you're always trying to do right by them. And then when it comes to the product, it becomes easier around like how do you prioritize things and what are the things that you think can really bring value to those people. And then certainly we're all in this to build meaningful businesses, so profit is something you always have to factor in. How can you ensure that you're able to do something sustainably for a very long time and hopefully do so in a way that has massive returns too. So that's always one that when you're thinking both long term and short term, I think gives you a nice framework to prioritize.
Yeah, thank you. So final questions of our panel. So last week was Thanksgiving in the US, and I think it's time of the year for us to reflect on all things that we can be grateful of. So I'm just curious, guys, how do you balance the constant drive for more with celebrating and appreciating all the success that you and your team have already achieved?
I can kick it off here. Like I'm really bad at this, so I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say. But I don't think I do a good job. I think I'm always more inclined to be in like push mode and this thing is broken, let's fix it mode. But I think at our company, one thing that we do is just create some channels for doing this really easily, or like venues, which I in our case are Slack channels actually. And we have a few channels where there's like a lot of thankfulness, I would say. One of them is just called Gratitudes, which is just like people thanking other people on the team for any sort of shout outs or going above and beyond in any sort of way, or just for no reason at all. Sometimes of just like, hey, you did this nice thing for me, or like you did a really good job on this project, or whatever it might have been. And then we also have a channel we call Voice of the Customer, which is it's kind of intended for not us talking, but like customers saying stuff. So we obviously hear from customers in a variety of ways, whether it's a call or a call transcript or a support chat or something like that, where people are really thankful or really enjoying something. I think that's also a good way to give shout out, because that's like reflective of the work that people are doing. So that's a really easy venue to be grateful for. Like, hey, you guys are doing a great job. Here's like the results of this, this customer using a feature or product or interacting with a person, whatever it might be. So I think creating active venues for being grateful is really good, because it's kind of a forcing function, and then you see that popping up over and over again. You see your Slack alerts and stuff. So I think it's a really good a good way to like take a couple minutes every day to reflect on those things.
Yeah, I think that's I think probably I'm forced to step away relatively because I've got a young family, so that like I think sometimes therefore you realize how cool it is to be able to be building a company while also obviously having a part of your life that is also not that, but they're reliant on it, so it also increases the pressure on that. Yeah, so it's all a bit mixed up, but it still like gives you some chance for appreciation. But I do think like in reality, I'm sure the most successful founders are like what Max described, which is like always on to the next thing and like paranoid about, okay, cool, we may have hit this milestone, but I'm really worried about whether we're going to hit this next one, and probably like a little bit of a downer sometimes. We do actually have a little bit of I wouldn't say a tension internally, but I think there's two philosophies internally around. I quite like to feel like a winner, like we set some target, we hit it, and we should all feel good. And now we'll feel confident about hitting the next one. And obviously, if you have targets, that's a good chance to reflect on it and obviously celebrate it and be grateful, etc., etc. I think there are obviously other philosophies which are like, no, set like a ridiculous target that you're never going to hit, but at least it sort of like opens up your mind to doing like crazy things. So I think both have their place, basically. I think you should do a bit of both. And I think doing too much of the latter, which is only setting big, hairy, audacious goals and whatever, and never hitting them, might work for a minority of people, but it will not keep everyone excited all the time. So yeah, just a reflection there, I guess.
Yeah, I guess mine maybe is a little more indirect or meta, is that I just try to surround myself with people that give me energy. One source of that is just meeting other founders. So being on this panel has been awesome, learning from other founders, because I think I can bring that energy back to my team. And I think just having gratitude I feel like we're just so all lucky to be being in this space, being to be able to work on our own startups and create something of value. And I think then when we do meet as a team, I think that enthusiasm just comes out more naturally when I feel I'm energized. We have weekly show and tells where every team member gets to kind of showcase what they've been working on. I think as a team, we're oftentimes celebrating those mini successes just on a more regular basis, because those bigger milestones, they are probably more far and few between, but the small wins, if you can bring that energy into those meetings and really celebrate each team member for what they're delivering, I think that helps.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I'm just very grateful to have all three of you spending time with us and sharing all these wonderful wisdoms. So I think we are very close to wrap this up. Any final words or any final tips of wisdom that you'd like to share with the audience? And where can people find you guys online?
Yeah, I would say don't be careful about listening to certainly me, but maybe I'd say us too much, because there's obviously lots of people out there who are far more successful than us, and they may say different things. But hopefully helpful thoughts at least. Best place to find me, I could say I'm most active. I'm like a watcher on Twitter at _smagos. So there's probably no point in connecting with me there, but LinkedIn I'm pretty active, so that's a good place. Or check out Metaview. Go to metaview.ai. Learn more about the company there.
Yeah, feel free to. I'm on LinkedIn as well. Trying to be a mini thought leader in our little space. So follow me on LinkedIn. Feel free to message me, or dover.com is where we work.
Yep, same here. LinkedIn, Twitter, if there's anything in terms of just thoughts or advice or anything that you think I could be of help, please reach out. I'd love to connect.
All right. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Siadhal, for joining us today. And thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your day.